The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Ardmore, Oklahoma Territory, as Pearl Jones stepped off the stagecoach, her wedding dress billowing in the hot wind like a wilted ghost of broken promises. It was 1883, and the journey west had been as brutal as the news she carried in her heart, news that had caused her betrothed to abandon her at the altar back in St. Louis, leaving nothing but a hastily scrawled note and her shattered dreams. Pearl gripped her worn leather suitcase, fighting back tears as the coach rumbled away, leaving her alone in a town where no one knew her name or her shame. The doctor's words still rang in her ears. "I'm sorry, Miss Jones, but you'll never bear children." A medical examination before her wedding, insisted upon by her fiancé's wealthy family, had revealed what the physician called an irreparable female condition. Her betrothed hadn't even faced her. He simply disappeared when he learned the truth. She stood paralyzed at the edge of the street, wondering what possessed her to come to this particular frontier town. Perhaps it was simply the farthest her meager savings could take her, or perhaps it was the advertisement she'd seen seeking a schoolteacher. With her education, it was the one thing she could offer. The town sprawled before her, a collection of wooden storefronts, saloons, and modest homes that seemed to be fighting against the surrounding wilderness. The Oklahoma Territory was still raw, still untamed, much like the pain inside her chest. "Miss, you planning on standing there till sundown?" A deep voice called out, startling her. Pearl turned to see a tall man leading a chestnut mare toward her. His face was partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that reminded her of a summer sky. I'm sorry," she stammered, suddenly aware of how strange she must look, a woman in a somewhat travel-worn wedding dress standing in the middle of nowhere. "You look like you could use some help." He drew closer, and she noticed the star pinned to his vest. "Sheriff Samuel Winters," he offered, removing his hat and revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "And you appear to be a bride without a groom." Pearl forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pearl Jones, former bride, former a lot of things. She gestured vaguely at her dress. "It's a rather long story." The sheriff's eyes softened. "Most stories worth telling are." He gestured toward the modest building with a hand-painted sign reading Sheriff's Office. "Why don't you come inside, get out of this heat? I can point you toward lodging for the night." Pearl hesitated, but something about the man's straightforward manner put her at ease. There was no pity in his gaze, just a simple offer of assistance. After the humiliation she'd endured, it was refreshing. "Thank you, Sheriff Winters," she said, gathering what remained of her dignity. "That would be most appreciated." Inside the small office, Sheriff Winters poured her a cup of water and listened patiently as Pearl explained her situation, omitting the personal details of her barrenness. She simply told him she'd been left at the altar and had come west to start anew, hoping to secure the teaching position she'd seen advertised. "Mrs. Holbrook passed 2 weeks ago," he said with a frown. "She was our schoolteacher. I'm afraid that advertisement is outdated." Pearl's heart sank. "Oh, but," he continued quickly, "that doesn't mean the position isn't still open. The town council would be mighty pleased to find someone qualified before the school term starts in 3 weeks. Hope flickered in Pearl's chest. "I am qualified. I taught for 2 years in St. Louis before." She trailed off, her fingers unconsciously twisting the engagement ring she still wore. Samuel noticed the gesture but didn't comment on it. Instead, he said, "I'll arrange a meeting with the council tomorrow. For tonight, Mrs. O'Malley runs a respectable boarding house just down the street. She'll have a room for you." Pearl nodded gratefully. "I should change first," she said, glancing down at her wedding dress. "This isn't exactly appropriate attire for a job interview." The corner of Samuel's mouth quirked up. "I don't know," shows determination. Coming all this way in a wedding dress. It was the first genuine smile Pearl had managed in weeks. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing out here. He stood, returning his hat to his head. "Come on, I'll walk you to Mrs. O'Malley's." As they stepped outside, Pearl caught several curious glances from townsfolk. She straightened her shoulders, determined not to shrink under their scrutiny. She'd come too far to fold now. Mrs. O'Malley turned out to be a plump, red-faced Irish woman who clucked sympathetically at Pearl's story but asked no probing questions. The room she offered was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," the older woman informed her. "The washroom's down the hall if you want to freshen up. And don't you worry about a thing, dearie. Ardmore has a way of healing broken hearts." Alone in her room, Pearl finally allowed herself to cry. She removed the wedding dress carefully. It had cost her father nearly 2 months' wages and hung it in the small wardrobe. From her suitcase, she retrieved the few practical dresses she'd packed in her hasty flight from St. Louis. As she washed the dust from her face, Pearl stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin. Her light brown hair had come loose from its pins, and her green eyes were rimmed with red. At 23, she had thought her life was all planned out: marriage, children, a home of her own. Now she had none of those things and never would. At least not children, she whispered to her reflection, the familiar ache settling in her chest. How could she ever expect a man to love her, knowing she could never give him heirs? Her former fiancé's cruel words echoed in her mind. What use is a barren wife? Pearl shook her head, forcing the memory away. This was a new beginning. She would build a life here with or without a husband. She would pour her love into teaching children, even if she could never have her own. With renewed determination, she pinned her hair back neatly and changed into her best remaining dress, a modest navy blue with a white collar. She would face this town, this new life, with dignity. Dinner at Mrs. O'Malley's boarding house introduced Pearl to several of Ardmore's residents. There was Dr. Frederick Wilson, an elderly physician with kind eyes and a steady hand; Abigail Turner, the milliner who examined Pearl's wedding dress with professional interest when she mentioned it; and Thomas Green, the banker's son who couldn't seem to stop staring at Pearl throughout the meal. "You'll meet the rest of the town soon enough," Mrs. O'Malley assured her as she served peach cobbler for dessert. "We're small but friendly, most of us anyway." "Most?" Pearl asked. "Well," the older woman lowered her voice, "there are always a few bad apples. The Blackburn brothers own the largest cattle ranch outside town. Think that gives them the right to run roughshod over everyone else, but Sheriff Winters keeps them in line well enough." As if summoned by his name, the sheriff appeared at the boarding house door just as dinner concluded. He removed his hat, nodding politely to the assembled diners. "Mrs. O'Malley, your cooking smells as heavenly as always," he said with a warm smile that transformed his weather-beaten face. "You're too late for dinner, Samuel Winters, but I might have a plate saved for you in the kitchen, Mrs. O'Malley replied, clearly fond of the lawman. "Much appreciated, but I'm here on official business." His eyes found Pearl. "Miss Jones, the town council has agreed to meet with you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the schoolhouse. I thought you might want to see the place beforehand, get your bearings." Pearl felt a flutter of nervousness. "That would be wonderful, thank you. I can take you there now if you'd like. Still enough daylight left." She nodded, excusing herself from the table. Outside, the evening air had cooled, bringing relief from the day's heat. Samuel offered his arm, which Pearl accepted after a moment's hesitation. "How long have you been sheriff here?" she asked as they walked down the main street. 5 years now, he replied. Came here after the war. Needed somewhere quiet. And is it quiet? Samuel chuckled. Most days. We get the occasional troubled drunken cowboys, minor disputes over land or cattle. Nothing like the cities back east. You fought in the war. Pearl glanced at him, trying to gauge his age. He couldn't be much more than 30, she decided. I did. Joined up when I was 17, too young to know better. His voice held no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement. Spent 4 years fighting, came back to find my parents dead from influenza and our farm sold for taxes. I'm so sorry, Pearl said softly. He shrugged. It was a long time ago. Made my way west, worked as a ranch hand, deputy, then sheriff. Found my place here. They reached a small, whitewashed building set back from the road. A hand-painted sign read Ardmore School. It's not much, Samuel said, producing a key to unlock the door, but it's sturdy. Built it myself, along with some of the other men in town. Pearl stepped inside, immediately charmed by the simple schoolroom. 8 rows of benches faced a teacher's desk and a black slate board. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. How many students? She asked, running her fingers along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. About 20, ages 6 to 16. Some of the ranch children can only come when they are not needed for work, especially during planting and harvest. Pearl nodded, familiar with the realities of rural education. It's perfect, she said sincerely. Far better equipped than I expected. Samuel watched her as she moved around the room, examining the small bookshelf stocked with worn readers and primers. Mrs. Holbrook was particular about her teaching materials. The town raised money for books last year. Tell me about the council, Pearl said, turning to face him. What should I expect tomorrow? Honest men, mostly. Mayor Fulton owns the general store. He's fair-minded but cautious with the town's money. Reverend Ellis runs the church and has strong opinions about moral education. And then there's Harold Blackburn, representing the ranchers' interests. Blackburn? Mrs. O'Malley mentioned that name. Samuel's expression darkened slightly. The Blackburns are the most powerful family around these parts. Harold's the eldest brother, thinks that makes him important. He'll likely test you, but don't let him intimidate you. I've faced worse than a domineering rancher, Pearl said with more confidence than she felt. The sheriff regarded her thoughtfully. Yes, I expect you have, Miss Jones. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Pearl asked, Does the position include lodging? I noticed a small cabin behind the school. It does. Part of the teacher's compensation along with a modest salary. He hesitated. It's simple living, but it's yours if you get the position. Pearl walked to the window, looking out at the small cabin. It would be the first home that was truly her own, not her parents', not a hoped-for marital home, but hers alone. I should get back, she said finally. I want to be well rested for tomorrow. As they walked back toward the boarding house, the setting sun painted the dusty street in shades of gold and amber. Pearl felt a strange sense of peace settling over her, as if Ardmore might indeed be the fresh start she needed. I hope you get the position, Miss Jones, Samuel said as they reached Mrs. O'Malley's door. The children here need someone who cares. Pearl smiled, genuinely this time. Thank you, Sheriff, for everything today. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. There's a town social this Saturday evening. Might be a good way for you to meet more folks, regardless of how tomorrow goes. Are you inviting me, Sheriff Winters? The words slipped out before Pearl could stop them. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners. I believe I am, Miss Jones. Pearl felt her cheeks warm. Then I accept. Thank you. That night, As Pearl lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the distant sounds of the saloon piano and occasional laughter from the street below, she thought about Samuel Winters. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness she found comforting. But she quickly chided herself for such thoughts. She had no right to think of any man that way, not when she could never be a proper wife. Morning came quickly, and Pearl dressed with care in her most professional attire, a dark green skirt and white blouse with her hair pinned severely back. Mrs. O'Malley provided a hearty breakfast and encouraging words before Pearl made her way to the schoolhouse. The town council was already assembled when she arrived. Mayor Fulton, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted her warmly. Reverend Ellis, tall and thin with a solemn face, offered a more reserved welcome. And Harold Blackburn, as Samuel had warned, looked her over with thinly veiled skepticism. "Miss Jones," he said, his voice as rough as his appearance, "you're a mite young to be taking on a schoolroom full of frontier children. Some of our boys are nearly grown and twice as wild." Pearl met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackburn, I taught classes of 40 children in St. Louis, including boys who thought they were too clever or too tough for education. I assure you, I can handle whatever your young people might present." The interview progressed, with each man taking turns questioning her about her qualifications, teaching philosophy, and ability to handle the rigors of frontier life. Pearl answered confidently, drawing on her experience and genuine passion for education. "And what brings you to Ardmore specifically, Miss Jones?" Reverend Ellis asked, his penetrating gaze suggesting he suspected there was more to her story than she'd shared. Pearl took a deep breath. "I needed a fresh start," she said honestly. "I believe that education is the foundation of any community's future, and I want to contribute to that future here. A woman traveling alone to the frontier usually has a powerful reason," Harold pressed. "Running from something, are you?" "Harold," Mayor Fulton admonished, "that's hardly appropriate." "It's a fair question," Pearl said, lifting her chin. "I was to be married in St. Louis. The arrangement fell through. I decided that rather than face the gossip and pity, I would make a new life somewhere my past doesn't define me. Is that forthright enough for you, Mr. Blackburn?" The rancher looked surprised at her directness, then gave a grudging nod of approval. The door opened then, and Sheriff Winters entered, nodding apologetically for the interruption. "Gentlemen, Miss Jones." His presence somehow made Pearl stand taller, more confident. "Sheriff," Mayor Fulton acknowledged, "we're nearly finished here." The three men conferred briefly in whispers before turning back to Pearl. "Miss Jones," the mayor said with a smile, "we would be pleased to offer you the position of schoolteacher for Ardmore. The term begins in 3 weeks, which should give you time to settle in and prepare. The salary is $30 a month plus the cabin and basic provisions." Relief and joy surged through Pearl. "Thank you, gentlemen. I accept, and I promise you won't regret your decision." As the men filed out, Samuel lingered behind. "Congratulations, Miss Jones." Or should I say Teacher Jones now? Pearl couldn't contain her smile. "I can hardly believe it. My own classroom, my own home. Would you like to see the cabin now? I have the key here." He held up a small brass key. The cabin, though small, was clean and well built, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a separate bedroom. Simple furniture, a bed, table, chairs, and bookshelf awaited her. "It's perfect," Pearl said, running her hand along the smooth wooden table. "It needs a woman's touch," Samuel commented, "but it's solid. I fixed the roof myself last spring." Pearl turned to him. "You've done so much for me already, Sheriff. I don't know how to thank you." "Samuel," he corrected gently, "and you don't need to thank me. It's my job to look out for the people of this town. That includes our new schoolteacher." There was something in the way he said it, a warmth that went beyond professional courtesy that made Pearl's heart beat a little faster. But she quickly reminded herself of the reality of her situation. "Well, Samuel," she said, testing his name, "I'm grateful nonetheless." The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Pearl moved into her cabin, transforming it with small touches: wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains sewn from fabric purchased at the general store, and a colorful quilt Mrs. O'Malley insisted she take as a housewarming gift. She prepared lesson plans, familiarized herself with the available textbooks, and met many of her future students and their parents as they came to town for supplies or Sunday services. Most were welcoming, though a few of the ranching families seemed to share Harold Blackburn's initial skepticism about her capabilities. Through it all, Samuel Winters was a steady presence. He checked on her daily, often bringing small gifts: a fresh loaf of bread from the baker, a jar of honey from his own beehives, a hobby she hadn't known he maintained, or simply information about the town and its inhabitants. The promised town social arrived, held in the church meeting hall with tables of food, a small band of local musicians, and nearly every resident of Ardmore in attendance. Pearl wore her best dress, a pale blue that brought out the green in her eyes, and for the first time since arriving, she let her hair down in loose waves. "You look beautiful," Samuel said when he came to escort her, his usual confidence seemingly shaken for a moment. Pearl blushed. "Thank you. You clean up quite nicely yourself, Sheriff." He had traded his dusty work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. The social was lively, with children running about, couples dancing to fiddle music, and plenty of gossip being shared over punch and pie. Pearl found herself warmly welcomed, introduced to dozens of people whose names she struggled to remember. "Don't worry," Samuel whispered as he led her through the crowd. "There won't be a test on names later." Pearl laughed, feeling more at ease than she had in months. "That's good, because I'd surely fail." As the evening progressed, Samuel led her onto the dance floor for a lively reel, then a slower waltz. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, surprised. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper dancing, said no woman wanted a man who stepped on her toes." His expression grew wistful. She was right about most things. Pearl wanted to ask more about his family, but they were interrupted by Harold Blackburn, who cut in with more command than request. "May I have this dance, Miss Jones?" The rancher's tone made it clear he wasn't really asking. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. "Of course, Miss Jones." Pearl nodded, not wanting to cause a scene. Harold was not nearly as skilled a dancer as Samuel, and his grip on her waist was uncomfortably tight. "You've made quite an impression on our sheriff," he said without preamble. "Never seen him so attentive to a newcomer before." "Sheriff Winters has been very helpful," Pearl replied carefully. "I'm sure he has." There was an insinuation in his tone that made Pearl bristle. "But you should know, a woman needs more than a lawman's protection out here. She needs security, prosperity." He pulled her slightly closer. "I could provide that." Pearl stiffened. "Mr. Blackburn, I've accepted the position of schoolteacher. That's my focus at present. Teaching is a fine occupation for a single woman, but surely you didn't come all this way to die an old maid." His eyes traveled down her figure in a way that made Pearl deeply uncomfortable. Before she could respond, the music ended, and Samuel appeared at her side as if summoned by her discomfort. "Miss Jones promised me the next dance," he said, his voice carrying an edge of authority that wasn't there before. Harold released her with obvious reluctance. "We'll continue our conversation another time, Miss Jones." As Samuel led her back onto the dance floor, Pearl exhaled shakily. "Thank you." "Blackburn doesn't understand the word no," Samuel said, his blue eyes dark with concern. "Be careful around him," he implied. Pearl began, then stopped, not wanting to repeat the rancher's insinuations. "I can imagine what he implied." Samuel's hand tightened slightly on hers. "Blackburn sees women as possessions to be acquired, like his cattle and land." "And how do you see women, Sheriff?" The question slipped out before Pearl could stop it. His eyes softened as he looked down at her. "As people deserving of respect and their own choices. My mother would accept nothing less." The music shifted to a slower melody, and Samuel drew her slightly closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. They danced in comfortable silence, and Pearl found herself wishing the evening would never end. But it did end, as all evenings must. Samuel walked her home under a canopy of stars, their conversation easy and meandering, touching on books they'd both read, places they'd seen, and their hopes for the small town they now shared. At her door, he hesitated. "I enjoyed tonight, Pearl," he said, using her first name for the first time. "So did I." She met his gaze, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer night. "May I call on you properly? Sunday afternoon, perhaps?" Pearl's heart raced. This was the moment she'd been both longing for and dreading, the beginning of something that could only lead to disappointment once he learned her secret. "Samuel, she began, intending to refuse to protect both of them from future pain. "Just a walk," he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "Nothing more. I'd like to get to know you better, that's all." His sincerity disarmed her. "All right. Sunday afternoon." He smiled, the expression transforming his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "I'll see you at church then afterward." He tipped his hat and turned to go, leaving Pearl with a mixture of anticipation and dread. How could she allow this to continue when she knew it could never lead to what a man like Samuel surely wanted: a normal family, children of his own? That night, she tossed and turned, torn between her growing feelings for the kind sheriff and the reality of her condition. By morning, she had resolved to tell him the truth on Sunday and put an end to whatever was developing between them before it could truly begin. School commenced the following week, and Pearl threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, grateful for the distraction. Her students ranged from shy 6-year-old twins, Emily and Ethan Williams, to 16-year-old James Blackburn, Harold's nephew, who made it clear from the first day that he considered school beneath him. "My uncle says book learning won't help me run cattle," the boy drawled during Pearl's first lesson. Pearl regarded him steadily. "Your uncle is entitled to his opinion, James, but as long as you're in my classroom, you'll apply yourself to your studies. Understanding mathematics will help you calculate profit and loss. Reading will help you understand contracts. History will show you the mistakes others have made so you don't repeat them." The other students watched this exchange with wide eyes, clearly expecting the notorious Blackburn temper to flare. But something in Pearl's calm confidence gave the boy pause. "Yes, madam," he muttered, not entirely convinced but willing to give her a chance. By the end of the first week, Pearl had established herself as firm but fair, winning over most of her students with her genuine interest in their progress and her creative teaching methods. Even James Blackburn was showing signs of grudging respect. Sunday arrived, and with it, church services in the small white chapel at the edge of town. Pearl sat near the back, conscious of curious glances from the townsfolk who were still taking her measure. Samuel sat across the aisle, occasionally catching her eye and offering a small smile that sent warmth spreading through her chest. After the service, as promised, he approached her. "Ready for our walk, Miss Jones?" Pearl nodded, her resolve to end things wavering at the sight of his hopeful expression. "Yes, although I don't know where we're walking to. I thought I'd show you my favorite spot near town. It's about a mile out if you don't mind the distance." They set off, Samuel leading her along a well-worn path that meandered alongside a small creek. The late summer day was pleasantly warm, with a gentle breeze rustling the tall grass. They talked easily about the first week of school, Pearl sharing amusing anecdotes about her students and Samuel offering insights about their families. "James Blackburn actually asked a thoughtful question in history yesterday," Pearl said, pleased. "I think he's more interested than he lets on." "James has had it rough," Samuel explained. "His parents died in a fire 3 years ago. Harold took him in, but he's not exactly the nurturing type. The boy's angry, and who can blame him?" Pearl nodded, understanding all too well how loss could shape a person. "I'll keep trying with him." They reached a bend in the creek where a large oak tree provided dappled shade. A flat rock jutted out over the water, creating a natural seat. "This is it," Samuel said, offering his hand to help her onto the rock. "Not much to look at, but peaceful." Pearl sat down, enchanted by the simple beauty of the spot. The creek bubbled over smooth stones, small fish darted in the clear water, and wildflowers dotted the opposite bank. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "How did you find it?" "I was tracking a lost child my first year as sheriff," he explained, settling beside her. "Found her curled up asleep under that tree over there. Ever since, I've come here when I need to think." "And what do you think about Sheriff Winters?" Pearl asked softly. He was silent for a moment, his gaze on the flowing water. "The future mostly, what I want from life." "And what is that?" His eyes, when they met hers, were startlingly direct. "A home. Not just a house, but a real home, someone to share it with." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Pearl knew this was the time to tell him the truth, to explain why she could never be that someone. "Samuel, there's something you should know about me," she began, her voice barely audible over the sound of the creek. He waited, patient and attentive, as Pearl gathered her courage. "The reason my engagement ended, the reason I came west." She faltered, then forced herself to continue. "I can't have children. My fiancé discovered this before the wedding and left." She couldn't look at him as the words tumbled out, her shame and pain still raw despite the weeks that had passed. Samuel was quiet for so long that Pearl finally raised her eyes to his face, expecting to see disappointment or, worse, pity. Instead, she found him looking at her with the same steady warmth as always. "The man was a fool," he said simply. Pearl blinked, not understanding. "What? Your fiancé? He was a fool to leave you." Samuel's hand found hers on the rock between them, his calloused fingers gentle as they covered her smaller ones. "A woman is more than her ability to bear children, Pearl, much more." Tears pricked at Pearl's eyes. "But every man wants heirs, a family. I want a partner," he interrupted softly. "Someone to share my life with, to build something meaningful together. Yes, I've thought about children, but there are many ways to make a family." Hope flickered in Pearl's chest, fragile and tentative. "You say that now, but I say it because I believe it," he insisted. "My parents took in 3 orphan children after the war, raised them alongside me and my brothers. Family is who you choose, Pearl." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Samuel reached up to brush it away with his thumb, his touch impossibly tender. "I'm not proposing marriage here and now," he said with a small smile. "We're just beginning to know each other. But I am saying that your worth to me, to anyone with sense, isn't measured by whether you can bear children." Pearl leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by his understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat there by the creek for hours, talking more openly than before, sharing past hurts and future hopes. By the time they walked back to town, something fundamental had shifted between them, a foundation of trust and possibility that neither had expected to find. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm. Pearl taught during the day, gradually winning over even her most reluctant students. In the evenings, she often shared supper with Samuel, either at her cabin or at the small house he kept at the edge of town. They talked about books, about the town's history, about their dreams for its future. Sometimes Harold Blackburn would appear, ostensibly to check on his nephew's progress in school, but his lingering gaze on Pearl made his true intentions clear. She remained politely distant, redirecting his attention to James's improving grades. The boy's showing some aptitude, Harold admitted grudgingly during one such visit, though I still say he'd be better served learning ranch work full-time. Education and ranching aren't mutually exclusive, Mr. Blackburn, Pearl replied. James can excel at both. Harold's eyes narrowed slightly. You sound just like Winters. He's filling your head with his ideas, I see. My ideas are my own, Pearl said firmly, as are my choices. The rancher stepped closer, his bulk intimidating in the small classroom. Just remember, Miss Jones, a sheriff's salary doesn't go far. The Blackburn Ranch, on the other hand, is very impressive, I'm sure, Pearl finished coolly. But if you're implying what I think you are, Mr. Blackburn, I must decline. My affections aren't for sale. Anger flashed across Harold's face. You're making a mistake, turning me down for a lawman who can barely keep this town in order. The only mistake would be pretending to feel something I don't, Pearl replied, standing her ground despite her racing heart. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare. Harold left, but the confrontation left Pearl uneasy. When she mentioned it to Samuel that evening as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset, his expression darkened. Blackburn doesn't take rejection well, he said, concern evident in his voice. Be careful, Pearl. He wouldn't dare do anything, she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. Not to the town's teacher. Samuel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Just the same, lock your doors at night, and if anything happens, anything at all, come find me immediately. The school term progressed into October, bringing cooler weather and the town's harvest festival. Pearl had been in Ardmore for nearly 2 months, and to her surprise, it already felt more like home than St. Louis ever had. Her students were thriving, her little cabin was cozy and warm, and her relationship with Samuel was deepening into something she'd never dared hope for. The evening before the harvest festival, Samuel came to her door with a small box in his hands. I have something for you, he said, a touch of nervousness in his voice as she invited him in. Pearl opened the box to find a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a book, hanging from a simple chain. Samuel, it's beautiful, she breathed, lifting it from the box. Open it, he urged. The tiny book opened to reveal miniature pages with actual writing so small she had to squint to read it. Knowledge is love and light and vision, she read aloud. It's from Helen Keller, he explained. I remembered you mentioned admiring her work. Pearl was speechless at the thoughtfulness of the gift. How did you? Ordered it from a jeweler in Kansas City. Took some doing to get it here in time for the festival. His smile was slightly shy, so different from his usual confidence. May I? She nodded, turning so he could fasten the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. When she turned back to face him, Samuel was looking at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that asked rather than demanded. Pearl responded, her hands coming up to rest lightly on his chest as the kiss deepened, becoming something more assured, more certain. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Samuel admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "What took you so long, Sheriff?" Pearl teased, her heart lighter than it had been in years. His laugh was low and warm. "Caution. Respect. Fear that you'd send me packing." "Not likely," she whispered, drawing him back for another kiss. The harvest festival the next day was a jubilant affair, with the entire town gathering to celebrate the bounty of the season. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Children played games of skill and chance, and in the evening, lanterns were lit for dancing under the stars. Pearl and Samuel made no secret of their courtship, dancing together repeatedly and sharing private smiles that didn't go unnoticed by the townsfolk. Most seemed pleased by the development, offering knowing glances and encouraging words. Only Harold Blackburn observed their happiness with thinly veiled displeasure, his eyes following them throughout the evening. When Samuel was called away briefly to settle a dispute between some rowdy cowboys, Harold approached Pearl as she stood alone near the refreshment table. "Quite a spectacle you're making with the sheriff," he said, his voice low but sharp. Pearl straightened her spine. "Mr. Blackburn, I believe I've made my feelings clear regarding your interest." "Crystal clear," he agreed, a dangerous edge to his smile. "But I wonder if Winters knows what he's getting. A woman who can't fulfill her primary purpose isn't much of a bargain." Pearl froze, her blood running cold. "How do you know about that?" Harold's smile widened. "Small towns have long memories, Miss Jones, and I make it my business to know everything about Ardmore and its inhabitants." Before she could respond, he continued, "Don't worry, your secret is safe with me, for now, but remember my offer. It still stands." He walked away, leaving Pearl shaken. How had he discovered her most private shame? And would he truly expose it to hurt her and Samuel? When Samuel returned, he immediately noticed her distress. "What's wrong?" he asked, leading her away from the crowd. Pearl hesitated, then told him about Harold's threat. To her surprise, Samuel seemed more angry than concerned. "That snake," he muttered. "Using your personal information to try to manipulate you." "But what if he tells everyone?" Pearl asked, fear tightening her chest. "What if, then everyone will know something that doesn't change who you are or how valuable you are to this community," Samuel said firmly. "And to me." His certainty steadied her, as it always did. "You're right. I won't let him intimidate me." "That's my girl," Samuel said softly, pride evident in his voice. "Now, shall we give Blackburn something to really talk about?" He led her back to the dance floor, pulling her closer than was strictly proper for a public gathering. As autumn deepened into winter, Pearl and Samuel's relationship continued to flourish. They spent evenings reading by her fire, took long rides on weekends to explore the surrounding countryside, and attended church together every Sunday. The town had fully embraced Pearl as their teacher, with parents regularly expressing gratitude for her dedication to their children. Harold Blackburn had not made good on his threat to expose Pearl's secret, though his resentment remained palpable whenever their paths crossed. James, however, had become one of Pearl's most promising students, showing a particular aptitude for mathematics and literature that surprised everyone, including himself. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Samuel commented one evening as they discussed the boy's progress. "Too proud to admit he likes learning, but hungry for it all the same." They were sitting in Samuel's small but comfortable house, a fire crackling in the hearth as snow fell softly outside. It was December, nearly 4 months since Pearl had arrived in Ardmore, and the Christmas season was approaching. "I've been thinking," Samuel said after a comfortable silence, his voice carrying an undercurrent of nervousness that immediately caught Pearl's attention. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, Setting aside the book she'd been reading, he smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "Pearl, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything." Her heart began to race as he moved from his chair to kneel before her. From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple gold band with a single pearl set in its center. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said softly, "and I can't offer you grand houses or fancy clothes. But I can promise to love you, respect you, and stand beside you for all of our days." He took a deep breath. "Pearl Jones, will you marry me?" Tears filled Pearl's eyes as she looked at this man who had shown her that love could be unconditional, that her worth wasn't tied to her ability to bear children. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Winters." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and commitment. They decided to marry in the spring, giving them time to prepare and for Pearl to complete the school term. The news of their engagement spread quickly through town, met with widespread approval and well wishes. Only Harold Blackburn remained a dark cloud on their horizon. His congratulations, when offered in the general store one snowy afternoon, carried a veiled threat. "I hope you'll be very happy, Sheriff," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Though a man usually wants to ensure his name lives on through his children." Samuel's hand tightened on Pearl's waist, but his reply was calm. "A man's legacy is measured by more than his bloodline, Blackburn." "Something you might consider." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." As they left the store, Pearl couldn't shake her unease. "He's planning something," she murmured. "Let him plan," Samuel replied, helping her navigate the icy street. "We're stronger than whatever he can throw at us." Christmas came, bringing with it a schoolhouse pageant that Pearl directed with enthusiastic, if occasionally chaotic, results. The entire town turned out to watch their children perform the nativity story, followed by carols and a feast in the church hall. Samuel gave Pearl a set of leather-bound classics that he'd ordered from back east, while she presented him with a hand-knitted scarf and a new holster she'd commissioned from the town's leatherworker. But their greatest gift was the simple joy of being together, planning their future as winter settled over the Oklahoma Territory. January brought harsh weather blizzards that howled around Pearl's small cabin and made the short walk to the schoolhouse treacherous. During one particularly fierce storm, school was canceled for 3 days, with families hunkering down to wait out the worst of it. Samuel insisted on staying with Pearl, concerned about her safety in the isolated cabin. They spent those days in domestic harmony, reading aloud to each other, playing chess, and talking about the home they would share after their wedding. "We could add on to this cabin," Samuel suggested as they sat before the fire on the second night of the blizzard. "It has good bones and it's close to the school," Pearl nodded, picturing it. "Another bedroom or two, perhaps a larger kitchen." She hesitated, then added softly, "Room for children someday." Samuel looked at her questioningly. "Children, not our own, of course," she said quickly. "But as you said once, there are many ways to make a family. Perhaps orphans like your parents took in." His expression softened. "I'd like that. Very much." Outside, the wind howled, but inside the small cabin, plans for a future filled with love took root and flourished. When the storm finally broke, Samuel reluctantly returned to his duties, and Pearl prepared to reopen the school. The snow lay deep across the landscape, transforming Ardmore into a pristine wonderland that belied the tension still simmering beneath the surface. That tension erupted in late January when James Blackburn failed to appear for school 3 days in a row. Concerned, Pearl mentioned it to Samuel during their evening meal. That's strange, he frowned. The boy's been so committed lately. I'll ride out to the Blackburn Ranch tomorrow, see what's keeping him. The next day, Samuel returned from his visit with disturbing news. Harold claims James has outgrown the need for schooling and will be working the ranch full-time now. Pearl was aghast. But he's showing such promise. He could go on to college with his aptitude. I know, Samuel sighed. I tried to reason with Harold, but he wouldn't budge, said the boy needs to learn the family business. This is about us, Pearl said, the realization dawning. He's punishing James to get back at us. Samuel couldn't deny it. Likely so, but there's not much we can do. Harold is James's legal guardian. Pearl wasn't willing to give up so easily. Perhaps I could speak to James directly. If he truly wants to continue his education, we could find a way. It's worth trying, Samuel agreed, though his expression was doubtful. But be careful. Harold's pride is at stake now. The following Saturday, Pearl rode out to the Blackburn Ranch alone, despite Samuel's concerns. She found James in the stables, mucking out stalls with the dejected air of someone performing a hated task. Miss Jones. He looked up in surprise as she entered. What are you doing here? I came to see how you're doing, James, she said gently, and to find out why you haven't been in school. The boy's expression shuddered. Uncle Harold says I need to focus on ranching now. That school's a waste of time. And what do you think? Pearl pressed. James hesitated, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. I miss it, he admitted finally. The books, the learning. Even the arithmetic. You have a gift for learning, James, Pearl told him earnestly. A gift that shouldn't be wasted. If you want to continue your education, I'll help you find a way. Hope flashed across the boy's face, quickly replaced by resignation. Uncle Harold would never allow it. There are other options. You could come to evening lessons or, what's going on here? Harold Blackburn's voice boomed from the stable entrance. Pearl turned, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. Mr. Blackburn, I came to check on James. I've been concerned about his absence. The boy's future is on this ranch, Miss Jones, not in your classroom. Harold's tone left no room for argument. Education and ranching aren't mutually exclusive, Pearl repeated her earlier sentiment. James can excel at both. That's not your decision to make. Harold stepped closer, his bulk imposing in the confined space. Now I suggest you leave my property before I forget my manners. Pearl stood her ground. James is 16, old enough to have some say in his future. If he wants to continue his education, get out, Harold growled, his face flushing with anger. And tell your sheriff that if he sends you to interfere in my family affairs again, there'll be consequences. Samuel didn't send me, Pearl clarified, gathering her dignity. I came because I care about James's future. Harold laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You care about defying me, both of you thinking you're better than the rest of us with your books and ideas. He jabbed a finger toward the door. Leave. Now. Pearl looked at James, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. I'll be at the school if you need me, she told him quietly before turning to leave. As she mounted her horse, she heard Harold's voice behind her. You're not welcome on Blackburn land again, Miss Jones. Remember that. The ride back to town gave Pearl time to think. Harold's hostility was escalating, and she feared for James caught in the middle of this power struggle. When she reached Ardmore, she went straight to Samuel's office to report what had happened. He listened with growing concern. He threatened you. Not directly, Pearl said, though she couldn't deny the menace in Harold's manner. I'm more worried about James. The boy is miserable. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Legally, there's not much I can do. Harold is his guardian. There must be something, Pearl insisted. Some way to help him. Let me think on it, Samuel promised. In the meantime, stay clear of Harold. He's a proud man with a temper and he feels challenged. February arrived with slightly milder weather and preparations for Pearl and Samuel's spring wedding. The women of the town rallied around Pearl, offering help with her dress, suggestions for the ceremony, and advice some wanted, some not about married life. Pearl threw herself into these preparations, trying to put the situation with James out of her mind. But her concern for the boy lingered, especially when she glimpsed him in town occasionally, looking increasingly withdrawn. One evening in mid-February, as Pearl was grading papers in her cabin, a frantic knocking at her door startled her. Opening it, she found James Blackburn on her doorstep, his face bruised and his lips split. "James, what happened?" She pulled him inside, her teacher's heart breaking at the sight of his injuries. "Uncle Harold," the boy said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He found the books I'd hidden. The ones you lent me." Pearl guided him to a chair, quickly fetching water and a clean cloth to tend to his face. "He did this because you were raiding," James nodded miserably. "Said I was defying him, choosing you and the sheriff over family." Anger flared in Pearl's chest, a protective, fierce emotion she'd never felt before. "This isn't right, James. No one deserves to be treated this way." "I ran away," the boy admitted. "I don't want to go back. I can't." "You won't have to," Pearl assured him, though she wasn't sure how she would keep that promise. "We'll figure something out. You can stay here tonight, and tomorrow we'll speak with Samuel." Relief washed over James's face. "Thank you, Miss Jones." Pearl made up a bed for him on her small sofa, gave him one of Samuel's shirts that he'd left at her cabin to sleep in, and assured him that everything would look better in the morning. But as she retired to her own bedroom, worry gnawed at her. Harold would not take this lying down. Morning came, and with it, the sound of horses approaching. Pearl had just finished making breakfast for James when she looked out the window to see Harold Blackburn and two of his ranch hands riding toward her cabin. "James," she said urgently, "go out the back way, head straight to the sheriff's office. Tell Samuel what's happening." The boy hesitated. "I can't leave you to face him alone." "I'll be fine," Pearl assured him with more confidence than she felt. "Go quickly." James slipped out the back door as Harold's angry voice called from the front. "Miss Jones, I know the boy is in there. Send him out now." Pearl opened the door, facing the rancher with her chin held high. "Good morning, Mr. Blackburn. Where is he?" Harold demanded, dismounting and stalking toward her. "Where's my nephew?" "James isn't here," Pearl said, which was now technically true. Harold's eyes narrowed. "You're lying. One of my men saw him come this way last night. If he did come this way, he's gone now," Pearl replied steadily. "And given the state of his face, I can understand why he wouldn't want to return to your care." Harold's face flushed dark with anger. "You have no right to interfere in my family. The boy is mine to raise as I see fit." "No child is property, Mr. Blackburn," Pearl said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "And raising doesn't include beating." Harold took a menacing step forward but was stopped by a new voice, Samuel's, calm but carrying authority. "That's far enough, Blackburn." Pearl turned to see Samuel approaching, James at his side. The sheriff's hand rested casually on his holstered gun, his expression resolute. "This doesn't concern you, Winters," Harold growled. "A minor seeking protection from abuse concerns me very much," Samuel replied. "As does threatening the town's schoolteacher," Harold scoffed. "The boy fell from a horse. Any damage you see was his own clumsiness." "That's not what James says," Samuel countered, "and given the pattern of specific injuries, I'm inclined to believe him. He's a child. Children lie." "Not about this," Samuel said firmly. "Now, here's what's going to happen. James will be staying in town under my protection until this matter is resolved legally." Harold's face contorted with rage. "You have no right." "I have every right," Samuel interrupted. As sheriff, it's my duty to protect the citizens of this town, regardless of age. James has made a complaint of abuse which I am obligated to investigate. This isn't over, Winters, Harold threatened, his gaze shifting between Samuel and Pearl. Not by a long shot. He turned to James. And you? You're no longer welcome on Blackburn land. You've made your choice. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, his men following reluctantly behind. As the dust settled, Pearl rushed to James's side. Are you all right? The boy nodded, though his expression was troubled. What happens now? Samuel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Now, we file the proper paperwork to have your guardianship transferred. It won't be easy, but with testimonies about your uncle's treatment of you, we have a chance. Where will I stay? James asked, uncertainty in his voice. Pearl and Samuel exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. With us, if you'd like, Pearl offered. We have room. The boy's eyes widened. You do that, for me, Samuel smiled. Family is who you choose, James, and we'd be proud to have you as part of ours. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, emotional conversations, and adjustments to their living arrangements. James moved into Samuel's house temporarily, while Pearl continued to live in her cabin until their wedding in April. Harold Blackburn fought the guardianship petition bitterly, but evidence of his mistreatment mounted as other ranch hands, reluctantly at first, then with growing conviction, came forward with accounts of his cruelty not just to James but to other workers and even animals. By mid-March, the territorial judge had ruled in Samuel and Pearl's favor, granting them legal guardianship of James until his majority. The boy's relief was palpable, his gratitude expressed not in words but in his renewed dedication to his studies, and his eager assistance with preparations for their expanded home. Pearl and Samuel decided to keep her cabin as their main residence, adding on rooms as Samuel had suggested during the blizzard. James pitched in with the construction, revealing a natural talent for carpentry that surprised everyone, including himself. My pa was a carpenter before he took up ranching, he explained one evening as they reviewed the plans. Guess I remember more than I thought. As April approached, bringing with it milder weather and the promise of their wedding, Pearl found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this place, this family. From the broken-hearted woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in a wedding dress, to a beloved teacher, fiancé, and soon-to-be guardian of a teenage boy, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The evening before their wedding, Pearl sat on the porch of what would soon be their family home, watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. Samuel joined her, settling into the chair beside hers and taking her hand in his. Having second thoughts, he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Pearl smiled, squeezing his hand. Not a single one, just marveling at how life can change so completely in such a short time. For the better, I hope, Samuel said, a question in his voice. For the infinitely better, she assured him. When I came here, I thought my life was over in so many ways, that I'd never have a family, never be truly loved. She turned to look at him, her heart full. I've never been happier to be wrong. Samuel brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. You know, when I first saw you standing there in that wedding dress, looking lost but somehow still determined, I thought to myself, there's a woman with a story. Pearl laughed softly. And what a story it's turned out to be. The best kind, Samuel agreed. The kind that's still being written. Inside, they could hear James moving around, likely working on the surprise he'd been crafting for them, a wedding gift he refused to let them see until after the ceremony. He's flourishing, Pearl observed. It's remarkable how quickly he's changed. Love will do that, Samuel said simply. "It changes everything." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed created especially for new beginnings. The entire town turned out for the ceremony in the small church, which had been decorated with early spring wildflowers and white ribbons. Pearl wore her original wedding dress, altered slightly by Abigail Turner to reflect her new life and circumstances. As she walked down the aisle toward Samuel, her eyes found James standing proudly beside him as best man, and her heart swelled with a happiness she had once thought beyond her reach. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When the time came for their vows, Samuel took both of Pearl's hands in his and spoke with such sincerity that tears gathered in her eyes. "Pearl, when you came to Ardmore, you brought light and learning not just to the children, but to all of us, especially to me. I promise to love you, cherish you, and walk beside you through whatever life brings our way. To build a home and a family with you that's filled with love, respect, and joy." When it was her turn, Pearl's voice was steady despite her tears. "Samuel, you truly saw me when I felt invisible and incomplete. You showed me that love isn't measured by what we can or cannot do, but by the depth of our hearts. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you that's rich with purpose and meaning. To create a home where love is the foundation of everything we do." As they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, the church erupted in applause, with Mrs. O'Malley's happy sobbing audible above the cheers. The celebration afterward was jubilant, with food and dancing lasting well into the evening. Harold Blackburn was notably absent, having retreated to his ranch in bitter defeat after losing the guardianship battle. His absence was a relief to everyone, especially James, who danced and laughed with a freedom he'd never before displayed. As the party wound down, James finally revealed his wedding gift, a beautifully crafted wooden sign that read "Winter's Family Home," with space beneath for names to be added as their family grew. "It's perfect," Pearl said, embracing the boy who had become so dear to her. "Thank you, James." "Thank you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me a real home." That night, as Pearl and Samuel retired to their expanded cabin, now a proper house with room for their family to grow, they stood in the doorway of their bedroom, taking in the enormity of the journey that had brought them together. "Are you happy, Mrs. Winters?" Samuel asked softly, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she answered, turning in his embrace to face him. "Are you having any regrets about—" She hesitated, the old insecurity briefly surfacing. Samuel silenced her with a tender kiss. "Pearl, listen to me. I meant what I said months ago by the creek, and what I said today in the church. A family isn't defined by blood or birth. It's defined by love." His hand caressed her cheek. "And our home, our life together, will be filled with more love than you can imagine." Pearl's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. "I love you, Samuel Winters." "And I love you, Pearl Winters," he replied, the sound of her new name sending warmth through her entire being. Now and always. Years passed, and the Winters family grew in unexpected ways. James thrived under their guidance, eventually attending college in St. Louis with the full support of his adopted parents. He returned to Ardmore with a degree in law and a determination to help others who, like him, needed an advocate. In 1886, a devastating fire in a neighboring town left 3 young siblings orphaned. Without hesitation, Pearl and Samuel opened their home and hearts to them: Emma, age 8, Michael, age 6, and baby Thomas, just 18 months old. The adoption process was swift, aided by James's legal expertise, and the house expanded once more to accommodate their growing family. In 1889, As the Oklahoma land rush brought new settlers streaming into the territory, a young woman arrived in Ardmore, barely 17 and heavily pregnant. Abandoned by the man who had promised to marry her, she was desperate and alone. Pearl, now a respected figure in the community beyond her role as teacher, took the girl in. When complications arose during childbirth, the young mother made Pearl and Samuel promise to raise her daughter as their own. They named the baby girl Hope, in honor of what they had found in each other and wished for her future. Harold Blackburn eventually left Ardmore, his bitterness and resentment driving him to sell his ranch and move further west. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief at his departure, and the shadow he had cast over the Winters family finally lifted completely. By 1893, the Winters home was a bustling center of activity, with 6 children of various ages filling it with laughter, occasional chaos, and boundless love. Pearl continued teaching, now with Emma assisting her as she showed the same aptitude for education that had marked Pearl's early career. Samuel remained sheriff, though he had trained deputies to handle more of the day-to-day work as he devoted time to his family, and the children's home they had established on the edge of town for orphans passing through the territory. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the yard, Pearl leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Did you ever imagine our family would look like this?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Samuel's arm tightened around her shoulders. "No, but it's better than anything I could have dreamed." Pearl thought back to that moment years ago when she had sobbed to him, revealing her deepest pain and fear. "I'm completely barren." And she remembered his reply, spoken with such certainty and love. "Then we'll fill our home with love." Looking at the children playing before them, James home from law school, Emma teaching little Hope to make daisy chains, Michael and Thomas engaged in a spirited game of tag with 2 children from the orphanage who visited regularly, Pearl knew that promise had been fulfilled beyond measure. "We did it, didn't we?" she murmured. "We filled our home with love." Samuel kissed the top of her head, his voice thick with emotion. "To overflowing, my love, to overflowing." As the sun set over Ardmore, casting long golden shadows across what had become the most respected and beloved family in town, Pearl knew that her journey from abandoned bride to beloved teacher, wife, and mother had been exactly as it was meant to be. Not despite her inability to bear children, but perhaps because of it. For it had led her here to this man, these children, this life overflowing with purpose and joy. And in the end, isn't that what makes a family? Not the circumstances of its creation, but the love that binds it together, day after day, through all of life's challenges and triumphs. For Pearl and Samuel Winters, the answer was clear. Their legacy wasn't written in bloodlines, but in the lives they touched, the children they raised, and the love they shared, a love that would endure long after they were gone. Passed down through generations of the family they had created, not from obligation, but from the purest, most deliberate love.